Recording then. All right, we've got the recording up and going. Heidi, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Can you show the PowerPoint?
Sure can.
All right. So we're almost 2 years old now, and so excited to see Coaching Agile journeys grow and grow. And so now we have a bunch of co-hosts, Isaac and Jeff, myself, and Lori and Mark Kruth. And so we share duties among ourselves. We just do this all in our own time. We did this because we wanted to keep learning, and then we realized we should share this more widely with the community. And so we are dedicated to finding focused topics to talk about. And so when we come here and we gather together, we don't want to just do one-way presentations. So we start off more in the webinar mode, and then we kind of brought it back and said, let's hear from the community. And so this really has grown to be a very rich interaction, and which we're so grateful that you guys keep joining every single time. We have a sponsor, Teal Mavericks, and they do consulting and training. So there's some Management 3.0 two-day weekend training coming up in Chicago this weekend. There's still time if you're in the Chicago area or can get up there. Go to tealmavericks.com for more information. Promo code CAJ. Next. And of course, we do this of our own money and time. So if you really are getting value out of it, we'd love it if you bought us some coffee. And we don't really use it for coffee. We just use it to help host the website and for the tools like Zoom and Slido and other things that we'd love to keep growing. Yeah, Isaac did. They see Isaac did use it for coffee. So yes, please consider giving us a tip if you want to support us. And we are going to cover the role of managers in Agile. What a huge topic. No matter where I'm at, managers appear to be confused about what they actually should be doing. And I feel like oftentimes we don't set managers up for success in an Agile environment because we're so focused on the Scrum teams. And so this is going to be an open discussion around, problems faced by managers and the responsibilities that they can take on. But that leads us back to the retro board. Please go ahead and we want to hear from you. What do you want to get out of this this meetup? So there's a few things on the board, but does anyone want to speak up about what do they want to get out of this this session today? Any brave souls?
I'll say all the goodness in the whole world. I agree with Lori. That's a stretch goal for us. So that was actually just a test card. But honestly, so for me, I haven't typed this in yet, but for me, in discussing this, I've engaged with managers who they are combative when we start discussing Agile principles. And I believe at the root of it, they wouldn't say this, but I believe at the root of it, there's this fear, what about me? Right? I don't see myself in this thing you're talking about. What about me? And so I'd like to be able to answer better the what about me question. And I'm going to type that in now as a card, but I wanted to throw that out there just talking.
I'm curious if we have any managers in our audience. If you're a manager, can you either just speak up or put it in the chat? I'm a manager.
This is Dave. I'm a manager, although I'm a manager of Scrum Masters and coaches, so it's a little bit easier.
Ah, there you go.
There, if someone says I'm an engineering manager.
Yep.
There's a large group in the room. I'm a manager, product owner, engineering manager. So yes, sounds like there are lots of managers here. So awesome.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So for me, I think that I would like to address the fears of managers when they hear that they're going to go through an Agile transformation and they don't see a manager title in the Scrum team.
We have to help them understand they are the sponsors.
Aha.
They staff the teams, either by direction or some managers will open up self-selection, which was pretty cool to learn about in M. Pretty Campbell's book, Tribal Unity, one of my favorites these days. But I like to tell managers that if they have heard of or seen the old pigs and chickens cartoons and that line that we've kind of deprecated that in the community pretty much, but I ask them where they are in that picture. And as I tell Mike Vistos whenever I get a chance to rib him, I'm sure the farmer is just outside the frame of the picture, because the pigs and chickens wouldn't be thriving if they didn't have that husbandry. If they didn't have the farmers taking care of the place and setting it up so that they could thrive, what do you need to do a good job? What kind of tools and supplies do you need? And I wish Mike had included the farmers somehow, and I don't know, but that's the message that I like to bring to managers is you are the farmer, you're the curator, you're the support system for people. And, it's like the old idea of turning the org chart upside down. You're holding those people up. So stand strong.
That's such a great analogy. I really like how that feels, having that farmer, if you will, supporting the people. That's a great analogy. Thank you for that.
Excellent. All right. Well, we've got these up here. So why don't we, if you're on the board already, go ahead and give a dot vote to these, or you can even speak up here because we want to go through them as many as we can, kind of almost in a lean coffee kind of a format. But where do we want to start with some of these? And let's dig in to what we can get out of this session together, because I know there's a lot of experience and you just shared great perspective, but we want to dig into some of these topics. So go ahead and dot vote. We'll see where these go to. Ooh, I already see a clear leader right there.
We've got one more in the Zoom chat, Isaac.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, here, let me add that. That's really good. Mm-hmm. Better understanding of encouraging the Agile team to be comfortable with having managers as part of their team. That's interesting. I like that. Okay. But it seems like we have a clear leader right now as far as where people are interested or would like to start talking. So, wow, look at that. 7. That jumped out there as a clear leader. So why don't we jump into this topic then? Let's talk about this for a few minutes. And it's still going up. Insights to help me coach our managers. So let's discuss this a bit. Insights to help us coach managers. So I would understand, and please, anybody who wrote this or has more input, tweak it a little bit. But there are, we're coaches, we've got teams, but then we're going to have to coach managers as well. And how can we effectively coach managers as coaches? So we'll just open that up. I know there's lots of good feedback out there. What do y'all think? Or even refine the question some. Oops. All right. Well, hey, I'll just jump in.
I'll jump in.
Please go ahead, Colleen.
Actually, wait, was that Denise about to jump in?
No, it was Kim.
Okay, so I'll jump in. So actually, Denise is also on the call. Denise, hey, Denise, I know you see me. Denise actually had a really good approach to any sort of Agile adoption where we're doing training for teams. She actually has a functional manager training where she helps them understand how their role is going to change during any sort of Agile adoption. And I think that's a really good way to start the coaching conversation, but maybe not the end of the coaching conversation. And I think that's where I can get better. Hi, Kim.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask an additional question, which was, are managers even open to hearing insights?
Interesting. Okay.
I think that's, often what I have seen, at least, is that certainly executive directors and above come in saying, okay, we want everybody to be Agile, and the everybody might not be them, right? So interested to hear other folks' experience with that.
I work pretty closely with our Agile coaches. I feel like it's a more collaborative type environment as we, I'm seeking advice from them and vice versa to just make the teams better. So I've been with Eventbrite for 6 months, and I guess it's getting close to a year that we've gone to the Spotify model. So it dramatically changed the role of the manager. So I'd been in an agile environment before, but it's in the Spotify model, my role has changed a little bit, and just trying to make sure that I support the team in that autonomous way.
That's interesting. Go ahead.
Hey, Loretta, I just want to say kudos, number one, for having the courage to jump into that model. And second, it's interesting that when people say, hey, we're going to follow the Spotify model, because Spotify says don't follow our model, because by the time you try to adopt what we're doing, we're probably going to have changed our model to meet what we need right then. So, what does that mean for you when you say the Spotify model? You mean squads and guilds and leagues, and they have the opt-in to a team kind of mentality too, and be able to leave at any time if they feel like they're not going to add value?
We don't go as far as the opt-in. That kind of has to be more of a thoughtful conversation, but we do, as autonomous is very big. And so the product manager or product owner has basically forms a lot of the strategic direction of the backlog. And then the teams themselves will say, this is the work we want to do. This is how we think we're going to achieve it. But as a manager, I'm not the one driving those things. I'm more of in a supporting role.
That's awesome. Kudos.
Yeah, who is driving that, like the Spotify model? So that comes from your manager or very top leadership?
As far as driving that, so it did come from leadership. We had merged with we acquired another company, and they used the Spotify model, and we decided to adopt that. So we hired several Agile coaches, sent people to Agile training, and while I wasn't necessarily there for that initial transformation, by the time I started, a lot of the dust had settled, so I didn't get to see as much of the growing pains. But it kind of came from that. It did come from top down, but they had the support of leadership to kind of put people in the right place and give them the space to make some mistakes and kind of learn and kind of adopt it in the right way that works for the teams.
That's awesome.
Yeah, makes sense. I had a manager who he actually was able to transition from a super command and control person, but something like the light bulb just turned on, and then he became super agile minded, like seeking information on note estimates and seeking information on how he can step back better from the teams. And so when I try to coach managers, it's along the lines of stop thinking you know everything, not maybe necessarily saying it in that way, but have you heard of the iceberg of ignorance, I think? And Corporate Rebels had a really great diagram not that long ago, and I shared it on LinkedIn. It's the individual contributors see everything. They see 100% of the problems. And then as you go up, the problems become much less visible. And so I show that diagram to managers saying, why wouldn't you tap into this and find out where the problems really are inside of your team so that you can be better empowered to remove those impediments and try to solve those problems? And I think at some point, like, he just got it, and he really did change his mindset.
I'm curious then, let's pivot this in a direction. What are, from your experiences, when we think about coaching a manager, in line with what Heidi was saying, what are some things that you've heard from managers that you've worked with in either a transformation or in a coaching engagement and said, hey, here's some of these ideas, here's some concepts. What are some things that you've maybe heard that are concerns that maybe we can look at and see if we can understand the mindset behind those? So what are some concerns that you've heard or felt even from managers?
So I can speak to that. I have a team that's currently in the middle of planning the adoption. And it's not just a team, it's an entire department. And the questions that I've faced are, well, who's going to make sure they do their job and that they follow the process? That was some big questions. And what if they don't follow the process? How are we going to reprimand them or correct them? Or, it was a lot of things around that. Who's going to make sure they stay on the timeline that we had identified for this particular effort. Those are the big three that I can think of off the top of my head that I just got asked.
Thank you.
Utilization.
Huge. Those are huge.
The big one I also hear often is, well, how are we going to do their performance reviews if they're working in a team?
Yeah, I think going along with that too, the reporting. So like I had one team, like they wanted to be self-organized and decided they didn't want to estimate, but then they had to estimate because how else are we going to know what they're producing? Right?
I'm curious, Kristen, was there a history of them delivering what they promised?
With that one, no, because often what their priorities kept shifting. So it was really hard for them to even know what they promised.
Right. Yeah. So challenges at the team level.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that brings up, one of the main reasons why people feel, I want to say, reluctant to give commitments is that because they're not empowered to give those commitments because they totally rely on other things outside their control. So when managers say, how will I know? Like, we're only here to make sure that they deliver what they committed to. They're actually committed to it. And I was like, yeah, but what's in their control to commit to? And so the mindset shift around people really want to commit unless it's something that's completely outside their control. Of course, they're not going to want to commit to it. That's like a recipe for failure. So how can we make sure that they're, we're all on the same page here and setting them up for success? And it's that, what I guess people typically call theory X versus theory Y is people really they want to have autonomy. They want to have mastery. They just give them the purpose and they will do it as long as you're setting them up for success. And if not, I think that's where the challenge comes in, both from a team level and even a manager perspective. How can we set up our managers for success? Have we done that?
And I think, Heidi, there's probably like an entire other meetup on exactly what you were just talking about, which is, what is success? Is success a volume of things that we've completed? Because, yeah, sure, we can all, artificially hit a velocity point or a number of items completed. But did anybody ask the customer if we actually provided value to the marketplace? Because, and going to the managers, right? Do the managers even know what value is? Is there clarity in the organization to that?
So true.
Yeah, I think it was actually a neat opportunity though, because we were able, I say we, because there were a couple of coaches involved, we were able to sort of reflect a mirror back to the management. So we said, so do you want them to be self-organizing or not? Because if a team comes out and says, we want this for our process, and we tell them, no, you can't, then we're actually not allowing them to be self-organizing. So we have to kind of make a decision here. So that was kind of a really neat opportunity to put the mirror up.
Great point.
Interesting. So let me summarize some of the ones that I heard, if I could group them together, and maybe this is a clumsy grouping, but a kind of a grouping. It seems to be a loss of control is what I really heard. There's some element of managing that feels like your hands are on the steering wheel and you've got this. You're driving the team. You say go, they go, you're going. And then there's something about introducing this, hey, transformation, self-directed teams. All of a sudden you're saying, take your hands off the steering wheel. Well, what happens to performance reviews? And what if we have to change course quickly? What if I have to tell someone to show up on time? What if I have discipline problems? What if all these kind of what ifs mesh together? So how would you as coaches, some of you who had experience with this, address that control, that loss of control?
It's a fear of loss of control. The backdrop I want to put on this is a senior vice president of a large organization told me, he said, Ken, the projects that we're running on, and this was a while ago, this is when they were still experimenting before they made a corporate-wide commitment. One of the divisions of the company, large company, had run several attempts at becoming agile. And he said, what's happened is that our agile projects are more in control in the classic sense of upper and lower control limits, time, budget, you name it. Our projects are more in control than the projects that we've been running on our gold-plated house-grown solution delivery methodology, which was a mashup of the PMBOK and the RUP. And he said, so in terms of control or the illusion of control, first of all, the Agile groups have achieved far greater control. They're in control. Our customers are excited, happy with what they're building and delivering. So now that's kind of the backdrop. Now the questions are, what do I do? To be in control. And I think realizing that what motivates us all, like Dan Pink summarized, is true for all of us because we're all human. And team members most of the time want to have a purpose and be part of something bigger than themselves. They want the opportunity to keep improving, to master their skills, the challenge, the growth. And they want the autonomy, hey, I can do it myself, or we can do this together. And that when teams have really high team spirit, they're unstoppable. They'll figure out how to solve problems, and you don't have to tell them to do that. They just eat them up for breakfast. And I think that's really important to realize, that the theory X, theory Y, theory Z kind of thing. If managers have an unhealthy expectation, that's the first thing we have to work with. As a Scrum Master, serving as a Scrum Master, Agile coach too, but I've actually chosen to serve as a Scrum Master in the trenches with some teams. And I found that I had overlooked before some guidance in the official Scrum Guide for those of you that follow Scrum. The Scrum Master helps those outside the team understand which of their interactions with the Scrum team are helpful and which ones aren't. So when we have these, focus on points or utilization or other things or kind of misdirection or concern, we have to help people understand, and especially managers, what's helpful and what's not and how they can be more helpful. And then the second sentence is that the Scrum Master helps everyone change these interactions to maximize the value created by the Scrum team. And I think I have to ask managers who are skeptical, do you want to maximize the value? Look at the Scrum teams we've got stood up and running for the past year. They're blowing away their old records. It's the same people, same technology, same business. The only thing that's changed is the way we work together. That's it. So I keep looking for ways to be helpful, and Heidi, you had some examples. I'm sure there's more here. I'd like to hear some real world little stories.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, a great point. As managers, you go out and you hire the best and the brightest to join your team, and then you don't trust them to do their jobs. It's always puzzled me. So, if you are hiring the best people, then that's one of the things that I coach is, trust them a little bit. These are bright people. They're smart. They're creative. Let them be all they can be.
So cool.
So actually, he said something that I want to, so one of the things I've really been focusing on lately is my own cognitive bias. Obviously, I'm an Agilist, right? But I have this tendency to look at things in a very positive light when it comes to Agile and saying, yes, nobody walks into work saying they want to suck today at their job, right? But there are some people that are there just to have a job. And let's just, you even said most of the time, right? I don't know your name, it says classmaker. I'm sure that's not your real name. But most of the time, you're right. Most of the time and most of the people walk in wanting to make a difference and wanting to have some purpose. What about when they don't? Or when their own personal, let's see what word, the things that hold them back, I'm not sure what that word is, but their own personality or their style of working or whatever keeps them from working well in an environment like this. I actually worked with a developer who was on a Scrum team, and then the team decided that they wanted to move to Scrumban because it was a better fit for their context of work, and I absolutely agreed. And so they had tried Scrum for a while and, been fairly successful. And we moved to Scrumban, and he goes, I don't want to be using Scrumban because I like the boundaries of sprints because it forces me to deliver. I need something to force me to deliver. Scrumban's just too loosey-goosey. It goes when it goes. And I need that. So he understood that he needed the structure of something that was a deadline. So what do you do in that situation? And I'm not talking methodology or frameworks or any of that kind of stuff, but somebody who needs that additional whatever it is to be successful.
Well, you asked, it's Ken Classmaker Ritchie. There's like 70-some Ken Ritchies on LinkedIn now, but back in the 90s, I took on the trade name service mark Classmaker to distinguish myself from all the other Ken Ritchie rascals. So it's kind of a brand. Jerry Weinberg used to say, peer pressure is stronger than any other. And before you try surgical intervention on a team as a manager, you should watch and see what happens with peer pressure. When somebody's wounded on a team, the team will pull them along. If somebody turns out to be malfeasant, eventually they'll be ejected from the team, be spit out.
Hey, Deepak, I think you're talking, but you're on mute.
Looks like
maybe he's not. He's definitely talking.
Maybe it's not to us.
Maybe it's not to us. That's right.
While Deepak might be unmuting, I'll say Stephanie added a great point in the chat. She said it's a big issue for those who are in the public sector. Unions are strong, and we often have imposed team members that aren't equally motivated. So someone who's there, but who's not, I've got a job and I'm locked in, and so why do I need to come in? So this is true. A lot of our conversation here, Theory X, Theory Y, we are assuming, and I think you said it well, calling cognitive bias, we're assuming everyone would be kind of like us and say, Agile, yes, I can't wait to knock this out of the park. You're taking the restraints off and I'm going to go a million miles an hour. That maybe not everyone is on that same page.
Very true. And actually, Ken, you had a really good point. Yes, the team is going to eventually either bring them along, kind of bolster them, or say, hey, dude, you are letting us down. But in the meantime, that eventually could feel like forever. In our case, it was months and months and months. And, the organization was kind of like throwing the money away for a senior developer who just was not performing at the level at which they needed. So what do you do then?
Well, I think the title of this session is the role of a manager in Agile. And I think that's one of the most critical components of it, is you got to stay in touch with your team and listen to their feedback, because before they call somebody out publicly, if you're having one-on-ones with your engineers and the other people on the team, they're going to come say, hey, so-and-so is not pulling their weight. They've had this task that we thought took a day, and they've been working on it for a week. So you start to pick up on signals like that, and then you, behind the scenes, can start coaching the people and find out why there's a problem, what's going on. But that's where sometimes intervention is necessary, because if you don't do something about the person that's not doing anything, then they're going to just further demotivate the people who are thriving in the environment.
Yeah. Well said.
Yep. And I'll throw in another comment from the chat as well. Michael tossed this in as well. He said, this is where it gets important to involve HR. And they've even got an HR person with them listening to this call, because you have to start changing your hiring process and really, like he's saying, look for and begin creating a team of high performers, of people who want to be a part of, who want to have that space. Give me that space, I'm going to go create, and I'm going to knock the socks off this project if you give me that space and that free reign. So
learning
managers, HR getting involved together.
Yeah. And, one of the things is like the learning and growth mindset. How do you hire someone who has a growth mindset? And so in some of the talks we did for hiring Agile talent, it's not even looking at the the technical skills that they have. It's really the soft skills are becoming so much more important than the technical skills that people have.
That's so true, Heidi. So
true. And I think we also need to look, especially in large companies, and this has been really apparent for me. I've worked for a lot of large companies, as those who have the capability to be high performers and maybe once were, but through no fault of their own, were demotivated. Because there is such a thing as people who can be demotivated. I was one of them at one point in my career, where I was just so frustrated with the brokenness and the dysfunction within the company that I was like, okay, fine, I've done everything I can possibly think of. I'm just going to check out. And it was not a great place for me to be as a high performer, right? But I think as a manager, that's where you can kind of try to understand, okay, where is this lack of motivation coming from? What is it? Do you have frustrations? And this guy that I was talking about, he actually was frustrated because he wanted to contribute, and his manager was not, at that point, not the best manager, and they ended up letting him go eventually. So he's working his first few months for a manager who wasn't really collaborative, who wasn't really patient, who wasn't the things that this guy needed to be successful. And then he tried to reach out to another team to try to find his place within that team, and they shut him out, and he was a remote worker. And so he felt like he didn't have a place. He eventually went to a conference with some of the folks where he got to meet them in person, develop some relationships. Everything started to change from that point forward. And he's actually now a fantastic developer for that company. But I'll tell you, it took a year, at least a year, to get this guy to the point where he was really in the zone where he needed to be and where he was happy and where the company was happy with him.
Yeah.
I love it. That's so a good points, everyone. Really good input there. I do want to keep us kind of moving in this general direction. So let me bring us back to the point we're discussing right now. So insights to help us coach our managers. So we've covered a lot of ground on different thoughts and ideas, really ways. We really kind of got into theory X, theory Y. Are people wanting to work? Are they not wanting to work? How do we motivate? Dan Pink came up, great motivation. So some good topics there. So if it's okay, I'd like to move us into a future topic or our next one. And I think we've really circled around that one pretty well. So clearly the top voted one, then we have 6 votes on this one, is address the fears of managers going through an agile transformation who don't see the manager role. And I'll kick this one off by saying I personally experienced this. There was that pressure, and I couldn't understand why it was. I just, hey, here's an agile idea. Hey, let's let the team decide. Oh, let's get the team in. Don't worry, manager. We've got a product owner and a scrum master. The manager doesn't need to be in the meeting. I know you want to be there, but you don't need to be there. And all of a sudden there was this intense pressure I was getting after talking to the manager. The root of it was, well, I don't see manager. You're talking agile, you're talking project manager, you're talking scrum master. What in the world? I don't exist. So let's address this a bit. I know, Ken, you already said a little bit to this, but let's maybe go a bit further. What would you guys say, either from experience, you've experienced this, or you've got this question and maybe came up with a creative solution for it? Share some of those thoughts.
I have an example to share, actually. For fears, I had a manager who was who didn't see what their role should be like, and so then they were actually struggling with, how do I break up my teams from one huge team into a couple of small teams, or maybe even 3 teams. People are going to be upset. And so I basically said, well, what if you allowed people to self-select the team that they wanted to be on? And he was saying, well, no, because all the high performers are going to self-select into one team. It's going to be like, grade school, where the poor people are left there, the one who are not that great in sports. And I was like there thinking about, okay, that was me. But so then I told him, no, give them clear enough guidelines for them to follow in order to break up their teams. But I did say, it's whatever we're ready for as an organization. So you go off and think, what are you ready to do? And maybe is it a little experiment, or do you want to allow them to provide input into their teams and how we would solve this challenge together? And so what he decided doing the first time around was to give teams input as to how they would break up the teams and who would be on the team. And then he decided that he was going to have final say. And then the first go around, it mostly went the way that he thought it was going to go. He made a couple of small changes, I think, and for the most part, it worked out well. And I have to tell you that the first time, people started being so grateful that their opinion was sought. He began to see his role in a new light. He began to see himself as a coach and a facilitator instead of the one that has to come up with all the answers. And so when like maybe 6 months later or 7 months later, when we had to do this again due to further growth and try to split up the team to solve a different problem, he actually allowed them to self-select the team structure and say, here are very clear guidelines and here's what's necessary from an organizational perspective for this to be successful. You go off and decide on your own how to make it happen. And it was really, really successful. And so like, those are the things that I would say I learned, and that it worked well. So offer up, a trial, an experiment, stick your foot in. And then sometimes you get that light bulb turn on.
I think sometimes there's also right, so when we talk about managers, that can be a very big bucket of people that are at many different levels. And I think the level of manager that gets most left behind, if you will, is middle management, right? You've got top management, they still have a lot of strategic responsibilities, and then you've got the doers, and in the middle, you have these people who, maybe went through one transition already in their careers where they went from being an engineer to now being a manager of people, and maybe they haven't kept up their technical skill in that process. And now we're saying, hey, we want you to be a technical expert and help coach your teams in a technical way, not, just a people manager, because the teams are self-organized. And some of their fear, at least that I've seen, came from just that, right? I don't know. I haven't kept up to date on new technology. And there's almost like a retraining has to happen, right? They almost have to be retrained on the things that the people that work for them now understand better than they do, because they've gotten stale.
That's a very valid fear in that case, but it's one that can be addressed. And so I think you get into kind of managing fears, right? Which is you want to make sure you address it, shine the light in that space and say, well, let's discuss that, and that's where empathetic coaching, right? Level 3 listening, you really want to go into that coaching mode. And I sense something's bothering you about this, and then maybe even walk that path. Okay. So you're concerned that something will happen, but maybe the team can help train you, help bring you back up to speed, right? And so that's where I think really get into interpersonal coaching and kind of what Heidi was saying before, those soft skills, as opposed to just saying, well, manager, let's make sure we define your role correctly. There's those fears that need to be addressed sometimes that might be legitimate. And in that case, I'm being asked to do something that maybe I'm not prepared to do because I've been focused on something else. And you would want to address that as a legitimate fear, but then move from a fear base to, well, let's have a plan for how we're going to go forward and help them find that path to move away from it and to advance. Because fear can be paralyzing, and it doesn't have to be, but it can be. And so that's where I think some of our best coaching opportunities, we're no longer necessarily coaching the problem specifically, but we start coaching really the person and helping that person walk through the situation. So that's a good point. What else do you guys think? Addressing the fears of managers, going through an agile transformation who don't see, and when we say the manager role, we can simplify it by saying they don't see a good fit for themselves, right? Because whether or not there's a manager role, really what it is it's, well, what about me? How am I going to work in this new way of working? What do y'all think about that? How would you coach that, or how would you address that? I would just say, again, since I'm on the coaching kick, listening is key. As a coach, I would really want to sit down, take that manager aside, and really say, help me understand, when you look at this transition, what do you see? And of course, you'll probably get that, well, it's just not going to work, and this isn't going to happen, and this is going to break, and the teams are going to be out of control. And, well, hold on. What about you? How are you going to work in this space? Where do you see that? And hopefully try to get them reflecting on themselves in the new reality, and then guide them through it. I think we heard immunity to change. We had a speaker in Jay Packlick, our last event, and he said, our minds can be resistant to new ideas. And I know all of us can probably say we've experienced that in our Agile efforts, right? We're trying to share this concept, and there's just this, no, that's a new idea that isn't going to work.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of work someone through those steps as a manager, who's a manager?
So I learned two things at the last conference I was at. I went to Agile and Beyond in May, and I went to two really powerful sessions. One was Doc Norton actually did a session on something he calls a collaboration contract. And I hated the word contract, but I understood where he was coming from when we were done. And basically it was, you get people who have a stake in the decisions that need to be made, and managers, QA leads, whatever, the team members themselves, you actually make a list of the decisions that need to be made collaboratively, and then each of you opt into a specific decision-making role. And then if you find that people are opting into the same role, that maybe one says, I want to be the sole decision maker and I don't want to have to consult anyone else, but there's somebody else who feels like they should be in that role, well, then you have a conversation around it. And then you come to an agreement of who really should be in that role. So maybe the decision is what testing framework we're going to use, right? And if I am a tester and I think I should be the only one to make that decision, and my manager also thinks that they're the only one to make that decision, well, maybe you can actually both agree on it. Or one is going to make the decision, but they're going to do it with the input from someone else. Okay, so that's the first part. And the other one was called BS, Quit Telling Me It's Impossible. And it was all about, it was great session. And it was all about kind of facing the fears that we have that keep us from moving from our comfort zone, the place where we have no fear, to that great thing that we're capable of. Yes, Heidi, you're right. It sounds like 7 levels of delegation, except for they have 5. And instead of me deciding how I'm going to delegate, this is the team getting together to decide how that delegation is going to happen in those decisions. But the comfort zone and moving to that great thing that we're capable of, one of the things he had us do the first thing he had us do was actually disable a mousetrap with our bare hand, which was terrifying. But once we got through once we got through doing it, because he taught us a way to do it, it's possible, right? If you put your hand flat, it's possible to disable a mousetrap with your bare hand. And then he had us be coached through it with a blindfold on when we couldn't see. I know, Lori's like, no, and I was that person going, nope, no friggin' way.
I feel like there needs to be a disclaimer, like, don't try this at home.
Basically, he had some working agreements on, he called it Mike's rules, which was anybody can say no at any time. And I was the one saying, nope, not happening, not doing it, not happening. And in the end, I did kind of walk through my fear and do it. And I felt so powerful because I was like, hey, yay. And then he took that to how can we do this in a group environment? Well, let's go ahead and just, in a collaborative session, write down the fear that we have about our career, maybe that we've never told anybody else. And you could do that with your team. Write down the fear that you have, and then you hand in the cards. It's all anonymous. And then as a team, you come up with a way and a plan and an approach that how are you going to handle it if that fear does come to life. And through that process, you identify with what you can, like what part of this is true, even just a little bit for me, and therefore what would I do if I had that fear. And it was really, really powerful. Wow. So yeah, great stuff.
That sounds like an awesome experience as a team to go through let's just make it visible and expose these, and then address some of them and actually walk through them. Like, what a really cool exercise to do.
I'm so glad I went.
And Colleen, you kind of tie us into, I think, another topic, looking back at the board here that's got the most votes. This kind of moves us in the direction of, Okay, so what then? We've talked about how do we address these fears, right? So there's some fears, there's this fear level, but then we've got to get to kind of a practical level. So how do we as coaches then work with a manager and say, okay, manager, now what are your actual responsibilities? We're telling you it's okay. There's a place for you in this new world. We're all going to be, we're all in the same team in the same company. It's going to be great. So what does that look like for them now? So we've calmed their fears. We've addressed some of those. We've walked the manager to a point where they go, okay, I'm willing to consider this. Well, now then, where do we actually go with, here's some responsibilities that we need you. And I know Ken kind of touched on this earlier, but let's talk through some of these. What would you ask a manager to do in teams that you've seen, whether they're, let's stay with mid-level managers right now. We're not talking about high-level managers, mid-level managers. How would you work with a mid-level manager and get them to help the team most effectively?
I'd love to hear from the woman who said she's using the Spotify model of what she sees, Loretta, right?
Yes.
Of what you see as your responsibilities now that you're in this new world.
I see myself as being very supportive. I want to set my team up for success. So that might be removing barriers for them. I mean, down to my intern, I'm like, tell me what you need. Tell me what you need. And if you're not getting something you need, then I'll remove that barrier for you. Like, I needed this from our platform team. So I'll go and try to set up and say, hey, you know what, we got a blocker here. Similar to that, but leveraging some of my relationships to maybe remove those barriers that maybe you can't be done by a scrum master. So going to another department or going to another business unit. The other part, I say it's a lot about coaching the team. So looking at my individual team members, it's looking for, so are you the expectations for their role? And making sure there's what they're doing for their team, but we expect certain things from a certain level. Are they doing those things, guiding them through their career, looking at what their next career goals are? Are they hitting on that in addition to, are they doing what they should be doing for their particular squad? Thank you for setting me up on that one.
Yeah. Great response. That's awesome.
And Colleen chimed in, solving political challenges that keep someone from another department who might otherwise not be involved.
Yeah, because that's what it sounded like to me, Loretta, when you were talking was, let's be honest, anytime we're in a company that has departments, it tends to become a little political. And sometimes it's, hey, I don't necessarily have a direct reporting relationship to you, so why would I help you? Loretta can go talk to someone and say, hey, I know that these two people, my employee, the person who works on the team that I manage this person, and this other person may not have a personal relationship, but you and I do. So, hey, can you kind of alter the prioritization for this person so that they can help? Is that what you're talking about, Loretta, or you're talking about something different? Did I get it wrong?
That's pretty much what it is, because there's, especially the priority, which you mean, it's like, it's not that nobody wants to help. Sometimes there's so many things that you've got to kind of understand what's there, or I can sense that somebody on my team might not feel comfortable asking for this thing that's really urgent. So it's helping with those types of conversations. And there is kind of the negative side. If there is a performance problem, then of course I do try to work through getting somebody to where they need to be.
Yeah, and I think that's a good. I was gonna say, I think, and this is from my experience, and I'd love to hear if someone has a different opinion, but I think that really some of those things that are the tie-in to the HR function. So you've got, of course, performance, but you've also performance to your role, right? Because each person is hired into a role, but you also have the hiring and firing, putting people on the team. We'll leave firing aside right now, putting people on the team, building the team as it needs to be built, right? Moving the right people into the right places and structuring that framework, I think, is really something that if a manager can help create a winning team, then the system itself can then take that team to the moon but you've got to get the right people on the right seats in the bus, right? And so I feel like that's definitely a manager should still probably be that liaison. And even for like legal reasons, that liaison to HR, something's got to connect the HR function back to HR. You can't just have a team, we don't like this person, fire them. Ooh, like that doesn't work. You've got to have, there's still that official link to HR, if you will. And I'd be open if anyone has another opinion on that, but that's something I've experienced.
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed is that it's no longer about a career path. So in former times, we were thinking, okay, this guy's an engineer, he's going to be a senior engineer, he's going to be a mid-manager, he's going to go up this career path. It's really about engaging each individual and figuring out what makes them tick to keep them engaged. And so that's one thing I really try to do with my my direct reports is say, what do you want to do? And one guy said to me at one time, I want to be a CTO, so I want to learn how to build high-performing teams. And someone else was really interested in project management and program management. And so you really have to not even say, well, here's the career path we have set up for you. Just go on this path and there you go. And it's really listening and helping them grow so that they can help the company be even more successful. So I think that relates.
Yeah, Prashant has a great question in the chat. In organizations that are transitioning, there seem to be a tendency to map PM to a Scrum Master role. Yeah. Do you think that this is creating some of the confusion? Is it better to map a PM to a PO role? I can speak from my own experience. I'm an Agile coach and also a PMP. Started as a PMP and found Agile, but that was more suited to my personality. I really embraced being a Scrum Master and really liked the collaboration and facilitation. But there's other project managers that don't fit into that role. Maybe they are more geared toward looking at the product itself and how to move the product along, and they'd be better suited for a PO. The PM role is an interesting position because it's all different kinds of personalities that fit in there, and sometimes they don't fit in at all, and there's that possibility as well. And maybe they just move into management at that point, and talk about some of the other duties that they can perform.
This is awesome. Let me summarize this because I'd like to go into a bullet round where we touch the last couple topics, I think, very quickly. So what I heard was removing barriers, interacting with others outside the team, doing some of the political maneuvering there, coaching the team on their role, of course, our hiring and firing element, kind of the HR function, and really representing that team to those outside the team. Kind of a little bit what Ken was saying is there in that Scrum guide as what the Scrum Master is supposed to be doing, but the manager kind of in a bit more of a business connected sort of a way because a manager has that title and that role as a manager. So I think that's an interesting space. Let me take us back over to our board real quick because I think we can get what I'd like to do for this bullet round here. We have a couple of minutes left. I see 2 questions that have 4s on them, and I think if we could just have one person maybe take the mic, I don't think they need as much discussion as maybe they need, here's my experience or my opinion on those. So let's start with this top one up here. How much knowledge do any managers need to have in Agile? What happens if a manager of Agile projects isn't trained in Agile, right? So what's that level of Agile that a manager needs, and how do you handle if they don't have it? Someone take the mic and go. We don't need to discuss this as much. Someone just give me their opinion on that. Or I can give my opinion.
Well, I think in general, if you're managing people, you need to understand, at least on some level, what they're doing. So if Agile is their world every day, then you need to understand their place in that world and help them understand their place in that world. So when you've got Agile coaches and Scrum Masters and other people that are doing that too, but I would think that's certainly hopefully your employees trust you enough that they're going to come ask you those questions and you need to be able to give those answers, or at least help them find those answers. So it doesn't mean you need to be an expert from day one, but you certainly need to be learning and growing in that direction.
And I'd even take it a level deeper in that all the training that they get and the sample scenarios that they get to play and stuff, do not give them what they need. So once they have that training, they need to go in and they need to sit with their teams. They need to sit in on that. Now, that's where it's hard because, of course, you've got all those things where, you don't want the scrum master or the manager to come in the scrum master. But if they're not understanding the day-to-day, how this runs and how all the changes are coming at them or at the teams, because they're the ones throwing the changes at the teams, it's impossible. I mean, I don't think that they're ever going to understand it, and they're still going to manage as if it's SDLC waterfall.
Good answers, you guys. Thank you. So beginner, and even Kay was saying a little more than a beginner, because you've got to have some of those concepts so you're not sabotaging the team as their manager who's over them. I love it. Last question, then let's make this one count. So better understanding of encouraging the Agile team to be comfortable with having managers as part of their team, and team is we're on a team. Someone talk to that. So you've got a team and we don't want managers around. Oh, no, we don't need managers. We don't want managers. How would you address that as a coach? Somebody hit that for us.
I think managers need to learn to say, how can I help? Some of you have said this already. How can I be supportive? And if you look at the Gallup Q12, the first question is, do I know what's expected of me at work? And through our backlogs and our alignment process, we have that. We're all on the same page. The second question is, do I have the tools and resources I need to do a good job? And I think that's the first place where managers, because many of them are quote unquote resource managers, in other words, people managers, that's their job.
I'd like to question the sort of the fundamental notion of that question. So at my last company, when we moved to Scrum, we made a decision on day one that definitively managers are not part of the teams. That teams are, they're self-organized and they're a collection of peers. And having a manager in there who has, hiring and firing authority over some subset of the team introduces a hierarchy that's unwelcome. And so the managers are outside of the teams. And so now, taking that a step further here at Eventbrite, in sort of our, implementation of the Spotify model, or at least those concepts, my role is a chapter manager. So I manage a group of engineers. I am not, my identity is not in the teams that my engineers are on. My identity is helping my engineers fulfill their role within those teams, but I'm not a member of those teams.
Right, you're a sponsor.
Definitely.
Benevolent.
Yeah, I think we're very loose. I was probably very loose in my reading of that with team, as in there's definitely the Scrum team or the functional team, and for sure there shouldn't be, because of that hiring, firing, the ability to make mistakes in that. You should probably be very careful about managers in that space. But then even as a company team, right, I use that word very loosely, at a larger state, somehow we've all got to work together to get the company to move forward as a whole. So that's interesting. I think all of these elements, my hope is that all of you can take these elements, tie them all together, and really have a productive conversation with both managers and team members about where each one sits. Let's just quickly review here. We talked about how much knowledge a manager needs to have, insights to help us coach managers, addressing the fear of managers who don't see their role, better understanding of how to be comfortable with a manager as part of the team, and the actual responsibilities a manager has within the Agile team. So we're right up on the end of our time. So this is going to be posted on coachingagiljourneys.com. If you have any ideas for improvement or new topics for Agile cocktails, you can throw them in that right column there. Go to coachingagiljourneys.com. You can sign up for our next event. We do have, where's my PowerPoint? We do have Disrupt or Die. Gary Walker is coming up next. So it's going to be June 20th at noon Eastern time. So the same as this meeting there. So I want to thank everybody for joining. Amazing discussion. Thank you all for your insights. Be looking for this to be posted soon online. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.